कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Our guest today has been a literary critic and columnist for a few decades now, 15 years I think. But when she decided to venture into fiction, she chose the world of cats. And we believe that she's an honorary cat herself. We are delighted to welcome on our show, Nilanjana Roy.
Well, I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the cats of Delhi, representing
and probably
them.
Also of the world by now.
Yes, it's been a long time. I started the book that eventually became The 100 Names of Darkness and the Wildings started as a short story in 2003. Mm-hmm. So the world took a long, long time to actually build and come straight in my head. But I'd always seen Delhi as a city that was hospitable to many kinds of clans. So you had the Mehtas, the Kapoors and the Singhs on one hand, and you had the cat clan, the dog clan, the Cheel clan on the other. I don't think I'd planned to write a book about the city at all, but you know how it is, you write about cats and the city sneaks in behind.
But in this case, in both these books, the city plays a very important role, and that also is surprising because you yourself, when you came to Delhi, you had your preconceived ideas about the big bad world that Delhi was.
It's amazing. I think so many of us who end up living here and end up actually loving the city, we start at an angle from it.
Yeah.
I've met almost nobody who says, well, we came here and we plan to move in and we plan to live for 20 years in the city. Most people, my husband and I, intended to spend maybe a year or two here. And every time we'd get fed up with Delhi, the city would change. Something about it would soften or become more interesting, or a certain kind of migrant flow would happen, and it would become that much more attractive. And I think over time, in the same way that the strays and the wildings discover, it's a city that has a well-deserved reputation for being aggressive and for being a little hostile. But there's something else to it as well. Delhi is a very soft city at its center.
So all that aggression is only bluster, really.
Oh, it really is, you know. Yeah. One of the things that I realized after years of living here is that people are kind. It's just that they're embarrassed at being kind, so they think that they have to hide it under this, you know, tremendous show of immense aggression and stuff. You see it actually more with the stray dogs than you do with the cats. Every neighborhood I've ever been to in Delhi, including the ones on the outskirts, they'll have dogs there as pensioners. And the Colonel's Kebabs outlet and defense colony, you know, one of the oldest in the city, has 3 dogs who every now and then get tired of kebabs and biryani and want a simple dal chawal.
True.
But I think when I started writing The Wildings and the 100 Names of Darkness, it came to me that this is a city that makes a certain kind of space for people and animals. And often those animals are expected to fit into the little corners just the same way that people are. But somewhere along the line, there'll always be a little bit of a welcome. There'll be enough space. You know, Delhi adjusts.
Adjusts.
That is really...
Your book has this very well worked out social structure of cats.
Well, that was part research and part observation.
Right.
I have to confess that I did a lot of things during researching the Wildings that would have marked me down as an eccentric in any neighborhood that was, you know, less curious than Nizamuddin. Nizamuddin is very used to eccentrics. But I used to follow cats around a lot. And there was a brief period when my attention was hooked by pigs, so I went sideways to some extent. But when I started to look at cat and Cheel family structures, I found that there's a surprising amount of research on it. And some of it is surprising. You know, it's like cats will look out for each other, cats and stray dogs will cooperate more often than they'll actually have wars. And the cat and bird relationship was stunning to me, because it turned out that in places like Tughlakabad, which has those vast open forests in Delhi, then you'll find that cats are bird predators, and in fact they're among the worst threats to songbirds that you could find. But in neighborhoods like
This you saw in your own family when you got your own Mara.
yes, I did.
You got her because she was a threat to the 3 dogs in your aunt's house, wasn't it?
I'm amazed that you know about that. But yes, Mara was acquired because she'd been rescued from a drain pipe, and then my aunt called and said, "You have to take her away. We have 3 dogs out here." And I said, "Are they menacing her?" And she said, "No, it's the other way around." Mara had discovered she was a tiny little orange kitten. She fitted on the palm of my hand.
So was she like
And,
the Mara in your
She
book?
inspired the Mara in the book.
Same orange cat with blue
Orange
eyes?
with green eyes and a distinct, I don't know whether it's correct to use the word personality for cats, but she had a
Absolutely.
lot of character to her. And she had a way of stretching her whiskers out, and then she'd do that for a while on the balcony. And then you'd suddenly find stray cats in the neighborhood floating in, you know, kind of like for the evening clubhouse session. And there was a set of timings to it. There was a point of time at which we were supposed to feed them, and there was a point of time at which we were supposed to ignore them while they chatted among each other.
Oh.
And there was an evening petting time between roughly 6:30 and 7, and after 7 we weren't supposed to acknowledge their existence because they became kings of the night.
So they were the Bara Sahibs, really.
They really were. And Mara was my introduction to cat clans. And she really put the nail in the coffin of this theory that cats are aloof, dignified animals. They are neither aloof nor dignified. You know, they spend most of their time in a very mohalla way conducting these intricate little plots against each other, and there's major friendships. And the only thing they seem to react to is cats from outside their territory. You know, stranger cats are seen with a great deal of tumult. And particularly in times when there is too much, I mean, I could go on about this forever, so you'd have to stop me. But when the cat population goes beyond a certain point, then they're very inhospitable to strangers from outside, of any species. But in years when the kitten population was down, and unfortunately the kittens had so many natural predators, chief among us, you know, the big feet, the humans, the traffic was another big problem. And then after that, a long way behind, you'd have the dogs and the birds. There were years when you didn't have much of a kitten population. And in those years, you would find that the cats became actively friendly, you know, towards the Humayun's tomb cats, for example. Or briefly, when the Sarai Kale Khan construction started, we had cats coming in from that part of Delhi.
Oh, visiting cats.
Visiting cats who'd stroll through, and they'd be very surprised if you recognized them. There's an etiquette out here that humans aren't supposed to breach. You're not supposed to be able to tell one cat apart from another. So if you can actually do that and you say hello to a cat you've met before, he looks deeply disconcerted, and then he realizes that he has to present his visiting card, so to speak, to you. You know, I mean, there's a little breach of protocol there. But in a way, cats were also my way of reclaiming other parts of the city. So the first book started in Nizamuddin, and the second book goes into Old Delhi. And then, of course, I bumped into a few cats and a few fish in Goa, so they sneaked into the story.
Is this your way, or was it your way initially to, you know, because you'd been writing about society, you have an opinion about most things through Hari Babu, your blog, and Akhand of Swat.
Oh, I stole Hari Babu from Kipling. I didn't think he'd mind. But this was years ago. I used to run a literary blog called Kitabnama. And I wrote a lot of the wildings when I was working quite seriously on gender rights. And as you would know, gender in this country is often a very fraught issue. It takes you into some extremely dark places. Particularly when we were looking at gender and malnutrition and, you know, or the kind of sexual violence we had. And so to a certain extent, the wildings, more than the books, the world of the wildings, it became not so much an escape, but I think sometimes we need to be reminded that there is also goodness and decency and excitement in the world. You know, sometimes there's a risk of getting so caught up with the headlines or the dire news of the day that you could forget these things.
But as a writer, as a blogger, as a columnist, and also as a literary critic, did you ever feel this was a great risk? Here were the great writers that you were reviewing and critiquing, and then suddenly you decide to plunge into writing and you choose cats as your subject.
Well, I'm so glad you asked this question because for 20 years I didn't actually write, because of the fear of following in the footsteps of people whom I admired so much.
Very much like Mara, who didn't want
who
to
couldn't move out of
move
the
out
house.
of her house.
Yes,
yeah.
I think that's one area where it might be a little bit, tiny bit autobiographical. But I'd grown up reading people like Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Alice Munro. You live in a time when there's so many great writers. And so I think in my 20s and 30s, the more I critiqued books, or the more I would read in 3 centuries at the same time. And you'd go back to the old myths, and some of the greatest epics in the world come from India. And it's daunting. How can you say that you yourself are going to be an author when it seems sometimes that everything good has been written? I made a few abortive swipes at short stories, and that were, dutiful short stories, things about Bengali families and all of that. And that really wasn't where my heart lay. I think in the end what happened was that in my 30s I discovered that I was unhappier not telling stories. The stories were just bubbling up from inside, and the more I denied that part of myself. I was running a publishing house at one time, and I was running a magazine, and I had this I was lucky enough to be able to write about things that I loved, from food to gender to books. And yet there was something missing. And when that becomes a hollow ache inside, then you might as well take that risk. For me, the risk was serious. It was, I didn't want to add another bad book to the world. And I look at these 2 books and I love the world that is part of them, but I know that they aren't perfect. And for me, I had to let go of the idea that I was ever going to do something that was perfect. I think it's a
But
great
the beauty of these books and of your writing is the quirkiness that enthralls all the readers.
Oh, thank you so much. I just like keeping that side of things alive.
Yeah, because nobody's looking for perfection. I think that went out with the classics somewhere, didn't it?
Well, I'm delighted to hear it. I can let myself relax now. It's just that when you're writing about the things that you love about, you forget about the need to polish everything and to try and make it. I think to some extension, perfection's a trap.
So do you find that this is really a liberating experience for you? Because when you write a column, naturally, you have to cross all T's and dot all I's and be grammatically correct and politically correct, which you are not, of course. But
I'm politically very incorrect.
Yes, but here, do you think it was a liberating experience in some way when you write about it?
The difference is that when you're writing a column, the lovely part about doing a column or journalism is that it introduces you to people who've got interesting stories. But you're always writing self-consciously. You're always writing for an audience. And here there was no audience except for a bunch of cats, imaginary cats, sitting out there listening to the stories, and for their sake I wanted to get it right. I felt very embarrassed about the fact that writers often talk about how hard it is to write and the hardships of the life. And the only hardship I can claim is that I didn't have a study of my own, so I've been working off the dining table forever. And that is no hardship. I've got my music, there are the mynas and the bulbuls and the tree outside, plus my own cats. And it was actively joyous.
So it wasn't really that lonely process that most writers talk about.
It is lonely. Ultimately, you're shutting the door on the world and you're going inside to create a world that you hope will stand. But it's a happy loneliness. What I had was, I had cats moving around the house as I wrote, and I had cats moving around in my imagined world. And they had all these stories, they'd keep putting up their paws and telling me something else. And then one day, I was going for a walk, a long walk from Nizamuddin to the ashram crossing. And I looked up and I saw the cheels. And the cheels, for some reason, in Delhi nest in telephone poles and electric lines.
Yes, they do.
And that gives them a certain crackling awareness as well. And they flew overhead and they were like, what about us? Aren't you interested in us? We have stories to tell too. And so in the end, when you're spending, I think it ended up being more than about 4 years worth of straight writing through this. It's a privilege to close the door to your everyday life and to step into this world of cats and cheels and peacocks and little brown mice.
Your animals have such wonderfully quirky names, like the mouse is
Thank you.
Jethro Tail, and he roared.
Yes,
and your cheel was scared of skies.
That's young Hatchet. A young hatch in The 100 Names of Darkness, a son of Tooth and Claw, who Tooth in his own way was the son of Stoop and Conquer. So yes, there's a certain trend coming out there. And my editor, David Davdar, had to work very, very hard to throw out some of the worst names. You know, for example, we had a bird who migrated from one book to the next. He was in the Wildings for no other reason than he had a really fun name, Major Minor.
Oh.
And it was only in The 100 Names of Darkness that he discovered that he had a little part to play in the plot. But there was one day when David called really early in the morning at about 7:38, and he said, "This is too much, they have to go." And I knew immediately what he was talking about, because I'd come up with a group of insects who were friends to Jethro Tull. And they were a group of beetles, and their names were John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And perhaps, yes.
That's perfect.
Yeah, but there's a point at which you have to know when to stop, and
but
you have to throw some of them out. Yeah.
Now, talking about all the cats who loved your book, especially the Wildings, which received the Shakti Bhakt award for the first book.
I was so surprised.
But wonderful, isn't it?
I was delighted that, I think I was pleasantly surprised to see that a work of fantasy and a work that starred by and large animals with, you know, humans and big feet being shadowy presences in the background. I was very touched to see that there was room for it on shortlists and for prizes.
And also room in the bookshelves of readers, because if you go by the kind of responses you've received, especially on your website, there are people who write things like, "I wish I was a cat and I could mew."
That was one of the loveliest things and one of the most unexpected things about writing a book. I really didn't know that it would have readers. I was very, very surprised when I showed it to David Godwin, and I didn't think that he would want to represent it, you know, because he doesn't do children's books, and he said, "Absolutely, I love it." And that was the first time that it occurred to me that the book might have more than one reader. Oh, well, 3 readers, me, my mother, and a cat. You know?
But this doesn't, both the books are not really children's books, are they?
No, they aren't. I love the fact that children do seem to respond to them. I've had a lot of emails from children talking about their cats, and they'll send in pictures and stories, and that is wonderful. But more than that, the response from adults has been extraordinary. Someone wrote in just the other day saying, "I used to live in Nizamuddin, and my father was very fond of Siamese cats, and his gardener looked after them. And I was just wondering, the meow in your book, could she be descended from my father's cats?"
That's taking fantasy to a different level altogether, isn't it?
I didn't know whether to say this is a book, this is fiction, it's made up, there is no such thing as a real meow, and I just didn't have the heart to do it. I wrote back and I said, this is perfectly possible in the realm in which these things work. Anything can happen in a story.
Anything can happen in a story. That's very true. Now, the other very interesting thing that people have pointed out is the fantastic communication networks that these cats have. There again, somebody on your web wrote that if you see the communication skills of the cats through their whiskers and through their meowing, that would put Facebook and other social networking sites, they appear banal in comparison. That's quite fantastic. How did you think of that?
Well, that started one day when I was sitting and I was actually writing a serious essay. And I kept getting this sense that I was being spoken to or called. And then I looked up to find that both my cats were sitting out there with their whiskers right out, trembling. And they'd been trying to get my attention for a while. And at the moment that I looked up, they'd given up. So they had their whiskers turned to each other and they were like, "No, she doesn't have enough, no moustaches. We can't get through." And I was fascinated by the way cats talk to each other. They had this network of smell and sensing much more than actual speech. Or little things like our cats will know 10 minutes before my husband comes back, His car won't even have rounded the corner and they know. They'll be sitting up and they'll be waiting near the door. I was away for a month, and apparently the day I was due to come back, 15 minutes before I stepped into the house, they were up and running around at the balcony saying, "Okay, she's home." And there's a reason for this. When I actually researched it, I discovered that scientists who are working on robotics are now working on cat whiskers and rat whiskers as models, the whiskers are really called vibrissae, and we should treat them with a lot of respect, because according to science, animals can send out emotions through this.
Through their whiskers?
Through their whiskers.
That's amazing.
And rats particularly use them as sensing and feeling things, particularly when they're fighting and when they're in close battle with prey. When I started doing the reading on this, I said, well, what I've created isn't actually fiction, it's plausible. It's a whisker away from being.
So it's probably more sci-fi than just fiction.
It is, but I think the more that you look at animals, or even the more that you look at humans, I'm astonished at the levels at which we connect. We just think of the human voice and the word and speech as the most significant way that we connect. Right. But in actual fact, one of the reasons why we're speaking face to face is because there is so much else in the way of communication that's important. If it was only voice, we could turn our backs on each other and speak.
That's right.
We wouldn't be comfortable doing that, because we're also looking at skins and eyes and all of that. It's just that I think we spend so much time talking that we don't spend enough time looking at body language and the rest of it. And animals do. They're tuned in, they're plugged in. They invented the internet before we did.
Long before we did.
Yes.
Well, we hope that we all learn skills of communication from cats and the other animals in your menagerie.
Thank
and
you
I'm
so
sure
much.
there's a third book to this series.
Well, there's a hint at the end of the 100 Names of Darkness that despite the happy ending, it isn't going to stop there. And we'll see. I'm going to take a break for a while because I'm working on a collection of essays on reading and why I love reading so much, and Indian books and Indian writers. But once that's done, there's something about the world of the cats. Once you step in, it's like the Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
You can never leave. Well, so now it's official, the third book. We can all wait for the third book, and I hope it comes out very soon.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being on our program today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for liking cats as much as I do.
I did.
Basically, I try to look at what are the reasons also through our cultural heritage, what is it that we are looking for through the mythological figures. So here I look at it that right behavior patterns are not invented overnight by a single poet. They evolve through slow crystallizations of personalities, real or mythical, who act in certain ways and who are then scripted into mythologies. Thus, the individual actions of a hero or heroine's journey are scripted in story form as collective right or wrong action. As a psychologist, we try to dissect the dominant cultural narratives that stand out and then analyze whether they are functional or relevant for us today. The therapist is interested to discover who is propagating the dominant narratives and what are their motives. Do these narratives affect society and culture at large? Perhaps heroism in today's world would be different if the hero in the myth would be a heroine, if the feminine function is repressed or effectively exiled. The male function too is affected, and ultimately society at large bears the consequences. Therefore, we need to re-examine whether the present cultural values that our dominant stories propagate are still relevant, or whether they suppress issues of gender, caste, race, or other human development potentials. Many women suffering from an oppressive education conditioning may never get beyond repressing their potential. They may unknowingly develop a prejudice against themselves and learn to internalize parental and cultural edicts. Internalized oppression weakens the inner voice, and the sense of self, the inner self, remains underdeveloped and often wreaking havoc, since it paralyzes the woman from within, causing her to collude unknowingly with her own self-destruction. At the same time, We need to review the functional role models that inform our collective consciousness. Many of our myths are patriarchal social structures that exist in the time of each individual coming into the world that exert great influence in shaping an individual personality. Many of our socializing stories available are based on limiting stereotypes. This is especially true for the institution we call religion. Symbolic images carry a kind of power because of their association with religion. Religion links the social order to the cosmic order. The rules of society are accepted because they are legitimized as coming from the divine, as if God gave these rules. Which God gave us these rules? And whose God is to be believed or listened to? And what is one to do when a religion sanctions a social order that continues to reinforce male authority? So therefore, serious attention needs to be given to extricate, at least acknowledge within the collective consciousness of our culture undesirable roles and dysfunctional patterns, because they play a great part in influencing the individual personality as they sanction gender inequality.